Welcome to the MuseCast, where we squeeze every last drop of inspiration out of Sunday's sermon.
Lord.
Sorry about that. I hit
Yeah.
record before I got turned around. So.
Oh goodness! Wow! What a unfortunate situation. See, this is what has happened. I have been lulled into a false sense of security, thinking that we were good, that you would not ever be able to catch me off guard, and woof. Like a thief in the night, Dan. Like a thief in the night.
Right. Man, it's
okay.
What a professional though. I mean, I totally rattle you, and you analyze the situation through the lens of Revelation. That's top notch use of content.
I'm there. I'm right there. And you know where we are. Oh my goodness. Happy Muse Day, everyone. Really good to be here with you all today. That joker is Dan Kent, and I am Shawna Boren, and we are pastors at Woodland Hills Church. And that's why you guys are here to go along this journey with us as we attempt to carry a dialogue, an intelligent, professional, meaty dialogue about Sunday's sermon from Jeremy Duncan, our Canadian neighbor. And let me just tell the people, Dan, that you are a bit of a fanboy of Jeremy Duncan. And I think people see why. I love Jeremy Duncan, but you right? You are a bit of a fan.
Yeah. I mean, just the sermon on Sunday, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but it just really kind of validated like this feeling, like, like for us, I can't speak for everyone, but like, for you and me, I'm sure that we read so much stuff, and you end up hearing a lot of the same stuff over and over and over again, and it gets to the point where it's like, you're hungry to keep learning, and then someone comes along who you feel like, man, I could learn from this guy. And what a blessing and honor to be able to have him join us and share his wisdom and his knowledge with us, even though we're so far away from him. And it's cool to have neighbors who are long distances away. It's kind of cool.
So. I know. It's kind of cool. Well, it's kind of funny because he's in Canada. You currently are in Florida. I'm in Minnesota. We are just like an international operation, Dan.
That's right.
We're just firing on all cylinders. I will say that Jeremy's sermon, and we will get into it, and I'm super appreciative of it. It had an immediate impact in that I literally thought through the color of lipstick I would wear today and also next Sunday. And in solidarity with me, Dan, what did you say to me when I told you that?
I said that in solidarity, I'm not even going to wear lipstick. That's how committed I am to supporting you. So, yeah.
That is brotherly love, and I am so thankful for it. All right. So Jeremy Duncan talked to us about good old Jezebel. And I am so thankful that he has a passion for that. Well, all of the text of Revelation, of course. His book is phenomenal. We will, I think, put in the thing.
A link, yes. A link or a bit, whatever. Sometimes people call it a bit, That's,
yeah, that's the cool kid slang for it. But we will, if you want to call it a link, we'll put a link to his book, Upside Down Apocalypse. It's a great read. So he talked to us about Jezebel. I'm so thankful because I certainly didn't want to talk about her in any kind of context. So I say Jeremy took one for the team. Do you have a show and tell for us, Dan?
Oh, I grabbed it just in case, so people know what it looks like.
Absolutely. Good stuff. All right. So we'll get into the meat of it all. But first, we can't go any further, Dan, until we hear your internationally renowned summary.
All right. Well, let me get my sermory glasses on and look at my notes here. Jeremy, we're doing church by church during this Dear Church series, and we asked him if he would do the Church of Thyatira, and he did so with great circumstance and great flying colors, I would say. But that's a terrible sentence. Have you ever had one of those days where you're just like your sentences, there's something not right about them, and I feel like that today. I feel like I'm missing prepositions, and like it's just all the stuff is just coming like in the wrong order. And so I tell you what, if this summary makes any sense and people get something out of it, I will be very pleased. He's doing the Church of Thyatira, and he starts off just giving some background of the town, which is kind of standard, but it's really fascinating too, because how Jesus uses the local kind of community, the industry at Thyatira, which was smelting, which they make copper and they make bronze, and Jesus taps into that by describing himself as this, bronze kind of deity kind of thing, and just how like John in this revelation taps into the local kind of I don't know what you'd call it, pagan worship of this military god, this Apollo Tremenius, who was called the son of Zeus. And here comes Jesus as the Son of God, and just kind of tapping into all of those things in a very strategic, effective way to kind of contrast what what the Thyatirans thought of this kind of demiurge versus what Jesus is saying God is really truly like, and just how what Jesus ultimately will offer is way better than anything that these militaristic gods could offer us. And then he goes into, Jesus praises the church. Hey, good job. Keep up the good work. But also, I got to warn you about this Jezebel. You're giving into sexual immorality, and Jesus sort of chastises them for this and warns them, because Jesus says that he's going to bring judgment to Jezebel. In particular, Jezebel will end up on a bed of suffering, and her children will be killed. And so Jeremy kind of talks about how, of course, as an apocalyptic work, John is using these apocalyptic tactics, or these tropes as they're called, and he's saying that, like, if in reading kind of Jesus' harsh language here, if we feel like, boy, that just seems so harsh compared to the Jesus we see in the Gospels, Jeremy says that, yeah, that's how you should be feeling about this. That's part of the apocalyptic trope, is to get you to feel that exact thing. And then, Jeremy just makes the point that, but rest assured, because this is an apocalyptic work, you can trust that John isn't introducing us to Jesus 2.0 here. He's not saying this is the new badass kick-assery version of Jesus that's coming later, instead of the soft, mushy Jesus that we find in the Gospels. No, it's the same Jesus. And what Jeremy argues is that we have to understand that Jesus is not giving us permission to point to individuals here, to call them Jezebels or anything like that. And John, in this revelation, he's not naming names. He's not saying that this person is Jezebel, avoid them, or anything like that. Rather, in an apocalyptic work, John is using these titles, these characters, as an archetype, as like this symbolic representation of these forces that pull us away from God. And we have always had these forces there since humanity was unleashed from the garden. There have been these forces that have tried to compel us away from God, and I think Jeremy Duncan calls them predatory ideologies, and I think that that's a good title for them. And they could just whittle us down: the sexual temptation, the the allure of cultural things that are ungodly, the temptation to pursue status, things like that. And what Jeremy argues is that we have this voracious hunger for power, sex, and status. That's our natural state as humans in this fallen world. And the only thing that constrains us from just giving in to that and submitting to that fully is a commitment to Jesus. And it's important because those types of ideologies, those predatory ideologies, can absolutely devour us. And he uses a few examples. He talks about capitalism and consumerism and competition and so forth. And so then he just talks about kind of these, how do you avoid these predatory ideologies? What do we do? What do we do with these shocking revelations that Jesus has here, where he talks about kind of this harsh judgment that's coming to Jezebel and or this whatever this ideology is? And the first thing that Jeremy says is that he says that we have to understand that, again, this is an apocalyptic work. And one of the roles of an apocalyptic text is to offer us a cathartic release. And he's like, Jesus's call for us toward nonviolence is the same as it was when he called us to that in the Gospels. But it's hard. It's hard to be nonviolent. It's hard to be loving. It's hard to be peaceful. We have all of these urges for retaliation and for retribution, and so Jeremy argues that one of the roles of an apocalyptic text like this shocking language, is this cathartic release of understanding that God knows our hunger for justice, our hunger for making God's world right again, and for healing and all of that. And the text kind of allows that catharsis. The second thing is even though the language of the apocalyptic text is kind of violent, it's also very optimistic and hopeful. And Jeremy just notes that even those who are totally overcome by Satan's influence, by these predatory ideologies, they still have this opportunity to repent and to be with God. And Jeremy just notes in chapter 3, verses 8 and 9, this promise that there will be this open door that no one can shut, that anyone is allowed to repent and come in and be with God. And so even though it's a violent text, it's also a very hopeful text ultimately. And then number 3, God is bringing death and justice, but it's not to individuals. It's to the ideologies that tend to crush people's lives and to whittle people down. And I like how Jeremy said it. He said that lies in the world, they have a shelf life, and we can even profit from lies for a while, and we can have benefits from lies for a while. But it's stupid to give into those untruths because, number one, they keep us from the growth that happens in truth. But number 2, the lies have a shelf life, and eventually those lies will be destroyed, and we will see things as they really are, and we'll see what God really loves. And so ultimately, Jeremy just kind of concludes by saying that the apocalyptic text really sort of shocks us into seeing things in a new way. And I guess that would be my summary.
By we, I mean Jesus Collective. We are a part of Jesus Collective. We are a partner church, and they have a podcast. And last year, we interviewed Jeremy Duncan about this book, The Upside Down Apocalypse. I was really interested in doing this podcast in particular because at that time, I knew that we were going to be doing Revelation at Woodlands, and I was not excited. I was not looking forward to it because, and we've talked about this, just the previous baggage of the way that these passages have been used. And I just was like, oh my word, I just don't have the appetite for that. And it was in listening to Jeremy and interviewing him that I really began to see things anew, really. Oh, okay, so this isn't all of a sudden everything that we've been taught and we're basing our lives on is just shelved for this new conquering hero that's going to come in and kick tail like the Avengers. No, this is still the same Jesus. But while we were interviewing him, I literally at one point, I think I was like this. Just but it's a podcast, it's an interview. So you have to be asking questions. And so I think at one point in the interview, I said, Jeremy, I'm supposed to be we're supposed to be interjecting and stuff. I'm just mesmerized by what you were saying. So I say that to say, I think he has that impact on folks. Yeah. So because it's a part of it is just, he's such a cool guy, honestly. And in his perspective, it just so aligns with, our perspective, which is really refreshing. He does have a bit of a Canadian lilt. And so, and he kind of looks, hippie-ish. And so it's just, I think it's just the recipe for just being like, which does make it hard to take notes. I mean, honestly,
it does.
Scott,
yes,
it does. Scott, my husband, he's the one who writes all of the sermon summaries and the reflection questions and the questions for gathering groups. And he too said the same thing. Like, he had to go through and listen. Oh my word. Sorry about that. He had to go through and listen several times because you just keep you find yourself just in this intense listening space instead of oh, I need to be note taking. So I think we're all in the same boat there. I will say this. I have never felt more Southern than when I heard Jeremy say Thyatira, because I would always say Thyatira. It just made me feel so.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what Southern. The right one is, because I even when I was doing my reading on it, I've heard different things. So
yeah. So maybe and when I say sound, that is not an insult. It's just whoa, the difference in the way I would naturally say that city and the way he said it was just vastly different. Okay. All of that to say, I really did enjoy Jeremy's sermon. Like I said in the beginning, I'm thankful he tackled the problem with Jezebel. I loved how he unpacked the role of Jezebel in these passages. And ultimately, I was so thankful because to me, this sermon, his entire book, what we've been trying to say, it really does get at the standpoint of the Jesus that John encountered, the Jesus that John was, martyred for, the Jesus, it's the same Jesus, the Jesus that we have received our salvation from. It is the same Jesus that is being portrayed in Revelation. We just have to dig deeper when we see these images or metaphors and illustrations that seem to portray him as, like Jeremy said, John Wick, or I like to say, the Avengers, it's not all of a sudden we get to Revelation. It's okay, now here's the new and improved, like you said, Jesus 2.0. No, we were told that when Jesus came, that was the full revelation. So this isn't the fuller revelation. Right. Yeah. And so when we're seeing things that are that doesn't seem, to align with the character of Jesus, then that's a good sign to dig deeper and to seek the Spirit to see what maybe is being brought up to us. I love that Jeremy reminded us, because I just think it makes it relational and personal, that these are 7 letters written to local communities. And the way that Jesus spoke to them through these letters was as if he was hey, Dan, remember that thing that, you loved it. It was very personal, and it just spoke to their culture, their city, what they were about. I just thought that was really a good reminder. Let's see what else. I'm just going through my notes. Yeah, just a reminder of the apocalyptic literature. We can't just read it as we would read, on Walden Pond or something. The purpose of it is really to almost shock and wake us up. And so, and then of course, I can say this because I'm a woman. I did appreciate just the way he broke down Jezebel and what is really being said there, and was out loud about how that has been weaponized against certain folks. So I just thought that was really, really powerful. And then just the reminder of these things that we think that we have overcome, that we can creep back in because of the society, the culture that we live in, violence and greed and power and sex and food, just any of those things that we just have an appetite for. Anytime that we are just buying into that, to the extent that the Jesus in us is fading, we are buying into the enemy and his lies and his ways. And so all around, I thought it was great, good reminder. Really thankful for Jeremy. Really not looking forward to having to follow him up, but that's a story for another day.
Yeah. Yeah. It is tough. Sometimes you have to follow up stuff like that. And, one thing that you could do is you could pre-record your sermon with a cowboy hat on and change your name and say, "This is our friend Sandra Brogan from Texas." And you could speak with a southern sort of accent, and maybe that might help a little bit too.
Yeah.
But
That will draw the folks in. I like
right,
it.
I think so. I think so. All I have to say is I have to follow you. So, I'm in the
Oh
same.
yeah, that's
I'm in the
right.
same.
That's the real task.
That's right. That's right. So,
Oh goodness. Yeah, so okay, we did get in a question that we are going to deal with, but first I wanted to, because I know like we've talked about, it was kind of hard to like dig into the notes. Although we did that and your summary was great. I'm just wondering, was there anything in Jeremy's sermon that just really was like, man, I wish we could, because we could have a part two. I wish he would unpack that a little more. Like if we had Jeremy here with us today, we would ask him like, hey, talk a little bit more about thus and so. Is there anything from his sermon, Dan, that you feel like you would love to have heard a little more of?
yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff there that I would love to hear more about. Some of it I don't know. You can talk about like these predatory ideologies, and how people succumb to them, and you can describe that as this is what happens. My interest is that I want to know more intricately how that happens and what is it. How do people get drawn into those? I don't know if there's much to say about it that would be, you know, that you could put in a sermon though. So I'm not sure if I think that's just part of, and we talked about this a little bit in our corporate meeting too, where one of the things that I'm exploring as I think about just sharing messages is, what is the most effective way to kind of, share God's truth and to uh, just explore what God is saying in a text and communicating that to a congregation, and kind of the dangers of that is you can create systems that become very formulaic, and one of the formulaic things that you can do is, okay, so here's my 3 points, and then here are the personal applications, and well, and that's great. I mean, I love a sermon with 3 points. I love personal applications. I think those are all really great, but it can become formulaic in a way that can be sort of limiting, because if I come up with an application for the sermon and you're focused on my application that I came up with, you might be focusing on the application that I came up with instead of reflecting on your own personal life. What you might have an application out of all of that is totally different than the one that I came up with. And because I'm up there doing a song and dance about my application, you don't get to see yours. And it's interesting because I think that the text kind of doesn't spoon feed how to apply the truths that are shared. And so I think that there is some risk in when we kind of offer those spoon-fed applications as well, which is not to say that we shouldn't do it. It's just to say that we should do it with a spirit of humility and just kind of describe it as it is. Here's one application that I see. And so I guess when I'm thinking about like stuff that I would like to hear more about, I mean, like you said, I mean, like that kind of thing. I'll listen to Jeremy talk about whatever,
no doubt.
But I would like to hear more about like that. And I also know like some of his theological background, and he is what's called a Gerardian. And so I would like to hear more of his discussion on what role do we play in like these sort of spiritual evolution in the world, and how do we quicken that spiritual evolution and so forth. So those are some of the things that I would like to hear. How about you? What would you?
Yeah. First of all, I want to say I agree. Like, I do appreciate when we can get practical. I don't think that needs to be a formula. I think that needs to be something depending on what you're talking about, depending on the week. I just think that needs to be something that's more spirit led. I don't think we can like prescribe like, okay, this is what we're going to do and this is how you're going to apply it. Because like you said, we all have different things that we're taking from the text, and we do need to dig in for ourselves many times. And so this is why I love that we are learning to love together, but we're all going to get different things from it. So that being said, I agree with you there. I honestly, two things came to mind. Like one, he kind of, and Greg does this sometimes too. He'll be like, oh, but we'll get to that later. Like he's like, later on, you're going to encounter the red dragon. And later on, this is, and I was like, ooh, wait, no, tell me more. Like, I want to hear what you have to say about it. I don't know. I thought I turned that feature off. Sorry. Anyway, so that, but then I also found myself thinking, man, if you were in that church in Thyatira or Thyatira, and you're getting this letter and it's like, these words from the Lord, and at first you're feeling like really good, like, ooh, well done. And then he kind of lowers the boom per se, like, oh, to be a fly on the wall in that local congregation. I would just love to have, and there's no way that Jeremy could have taught this, so that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying where my mind goes, like, man, I wonder what their initial response was. And I wonder, because we don't really get to see their reaction. We don't really get to see, like, maybe they cleaned things up and, got to work, or, it just, these letters end with, he who has ears to hear, let him hear what the Spirit is saying to the churches. And so, I'm just kind of curious as to my own curiosity, like, how was that received? What was their response? Were they like, get out of here with that? Or were they like, oh man, and did the repentance come and all of that? So,
this is, here's another kind of related to what you're saying. Some of the language in this section has been used as sort of a, what's it called? Like a bully verse, by people who are more conservative, calling people Jezebels. Clobberverse. That's what I was trying to think of. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's good to say, you can't, the way he said it is that these aren't, this revelation doesn't give us permission to point fingers and say you're a Jezebel or whatever like that. He's really talking about these forces that pull us away from God. And so I think that that's true. But at the same time, I wonder, like, how do we deal with the fact that Jesus is telling the Thyatirans to stay away from this ideology, stay away from these people who are promoting this ideology that is leading towards sexual immorality. And you were talking about, like, how did they hear that? And that's what I want to know too, because if Jesus were to offer this revelation today to, people in North America, you are succumbing to sexual immorality, I don't think people would even listen. I don't think they would hear that. It's like, it's not sexual immorality. It's just what I want to do. And there's like, you can't hold anybody accountable to anything unless it violates consent. That's like the one thing that you can now say, okay, you can't violate another person's consent. But other than that, there is no standard there, and we don't recognize that, and we don't feel held accountable to any of those standards. And so I'm wondering, like how do we, like, what do we do with that? And I don't think there's an answer to this, but it is something that is left unsaid. I think we did, and Jeremy did a great job of handling that one kind of big danger there, which is to use this as a clobber verse. But I don't think any of us have done a good job of exploring, well, how do we have ears to hear challenges toward what might be sexual immorality? Because I don't think I think that that's part of our culture that we've lost. and I don't even know where to even start with some of that stuff without swinging into, like, a lot of the problems that we had before, the shame-oriented sexuality and the Puritanism and stuff like that, which is also not right. And so, it definitely, there's a lot there to think about. But I'd be curious what your thoughts are on that. Maybe you have the answer. That would be nice. That would be nice.
Shawna does not have the answer. Shawna too is like, okay, so what do we do? Because I am a firm believer, and I feel like we've said this over and over again on our show, that we believe that the scriptures are timeless and timely. And while, yes, these were letters written to local communities, they are things that we are to learn from. They are like, it was a wake up call for the Thyatirans, but it's also a wake up call for us. And so are we being awakened to the things that we need to be awakened to, or have we just simply assimilated into our culture? I'm going to be careful here because I don't want to say too much. Like, this happens to you a lot, Dan, because we got someplace we're going this next week, and I got to reserve some of that for then, hopefully. But yeah, I think that is a question that we need to be asking, and I wish we had a concrete answer, but we do not. And you are right. And it's not just with sexual immorality. If you look at any of the other, let's just call them, the vices or anything, or the way in which, we are very militaristic, and the way in which we are very consumeristic, and the way in which we are very individualistic. I think there are a lot of things that if Jesus were to come with a letter and say, "Dear Shawna and Dan and MuseCast peeps, you're awesome. However, we got some things to talk about." My heart and my hope would be that I would be like, "Oh Lord, forgive me," and I would repent. But my guess is there would be some things that would be a little prickly, and I'd be like, "But what do you mean? Like, that's not, and that's just on a personal level. You take it to a societal and cultural level, and you're right. Like, all bets are off. Like, we did it our way, especially here in America. We are all about like, you're not going to tread on my freedoms. And right. I do wonder how many of us would have that response to Jesus. Like, don't tread on me, buddy, because this is my God-given right, you son of God. This is my God-given right to A, B, C, and D. Great question. I wish we did have the answers, other than I do think we need to be asking those questions. Otherwise, we are, just getting some great knowledge and studying some good stuff and, getting fat and happy off of it. I don't know.
Yeah, I do. I think that the answers are coming this weekend. That's, I just,
oh my God.
I have this feeling.
Take it back. All right. Well, speaking of clobber verses, should we get to our question that we got in?
Oh, I thought that's what we just did. Isn't that what we just did?
We did, but we didn't. We did it in a roundabout way. And now we're going to do it in a more direct way.
Let's do it.
We're going to do it in a more direct way, but not totally direct because we don't fully understand. So I'm going to say, Mr. T, thank you so much for your question entitled Jezebel, Misogyny, and Racism. It's very intriguing.
That's heavy.
That is, I know. Like, whoo, that's a lot. But he did say, if we have time, can we say a little more about the
If above? We have time, could you solve these three massive problems in humanity? Right. That's,
that you literally just talked about not really knowing an answer to. But could you go ahead and give it a shot? So Mr. T says, can you say a little bit more about the above? Oh, maybe he means above as in the subject, Jezebel, misogyny, and racism. Yeah, this is in real time, you guys getting a peek into us trying to figure out what the above was. So anyway, doesn't matter. As an amend to women of color, a warning about reading things into the text, and also how a Jesus-centered and in-context interpretation can help prevent such errors and guard against not loving our neighbors. So we've kind of been talking around it. And so let's just try to get to the point of it, of which I don't know that we have an answer, but we can try to get a little more direct.
The fact that people succumb to these predatory ideologies, that's a describable fact. How each individual does, that's a very personal, idiosyncratic reality that you would have to know that person. And I don't think that it's a coincidence that we are called into relationship with people so that we can together learn to love together, so we can learn our own individual idiosyncratic traps that might be keeping us in bondage to these predatory ideologies. And I think that part of putting Jesus at the center is helpful, because then you have a relationship at the center of your faith. And he calls us into having relationships at the center of our faith. And what that allows is that allows for us to still be together, even though we might not be aligned in our categories, in our theologies, in how we explain things, even in our values. We might be together in Christ, but have radically different values. And you see that in the disciples. You have, the zealot, and you've got the tax collector. I mean, that's like, basically Antifa and, Christian conservative Sean Hannity type guy, all together as Jesus' disciples. And I mean, talk about radically different and yet still together, because relationship is at the center. And I think it's similar too, where you have, even the example that I shared, it's like, okay, it's interesting that we all just kind of like nodded along as Jeremy talks about how we can't weaponize the word Jezebel. We can't weaponize this title against people. And that represents our values as a church, because we want to protect people from being attacked by this verse. There are other churches who wouldn't care that much about that. They would care more about the sexual purity stuff. And if this hurts people's feelings, so be it. And as much as I don't really have that value, it's possible that they might, even though they have that value that I don't have, and even though I wouldn't use that interpretation or that way of using the text, it's possible that those people who are in that kind of camp, they might have something to teach me that I'm not going to get with my values and my focus. And that's why having Jesus at the center, where we can come together as Christians, to the ability that we can come together as Christians under Christ, and with humility listen to one another and try to learn together to the extent that we can do that. I think that we have a lot to offer each other, but it doesn't work if you put a theology at the center, or if you put a value at the freedom first, or something like that at the center. It only really works when you put the person of Christ at the center. And so that's how I would say, whatever it is, whether it's racism, misogyny, whatever, I think it has to be this personal relationship with Christ at the center to kind of overcome the disunifying kind of nature of ideologies and belief systems and stuff and values. So that would be my answer. How does that hit you?
Yeah, no, I like that. And I just have a little bit to add to it. In regards to talking about this as some form of amends to women of color, because that was in the question, I will say this. First of all, I don't know that we can't. I do know this. We cannot fully amend for what has been done to women and women of color when this verse has been used as a clobber verse. And let me just in a kind way say, if you are hearing that and you say, you guys are making it about race, that's not a thing, that I just challenge you to maybe hold that and listen, because don't know if you know this or not, but I am not a completely white woman. I am a biracial woman, a woman of color. And so I do, and while my experience is not every woman of color's experience, and every woman of color's experience can be varied and different, I do know that as a whole, unfortunately, that clobber verse has been used toward women, and in particularly women of color. And women have had to carry that anytime they would step into any kind of leadership role or any kind of teaching role or any kind of like thing that was beyond taking care of children in the nursery or cooking meals, for Wednesday night fellowship. There have been, not everyone, of course not, praise God, but there have been too many that would say, she's got that spirit of Jezebel. She's trying to do too much. She's trying to lure us away with her sexual. And it's sad and it's ridiculous. So that's what I will say. We cannot amend for that, but we can call that out and say that is sad. That is wrong. Now, what can we learn? What are we meant to learn when the name of Jezebel is used in these instances? I think Jeremy pointed out a good point, that this isn't about a person. This is not about people, but about cultural forces. And so in a way, we need to depersonalize it and stop looking to name all the Jezebels in our world and all the Balaams in our world. Like, that's not the point. The point is, what are the cultural forces that are at play that are pulling us away from the kingdom of God, whether it's in our attitude, in the things that we are allowing in our lives, the culture in which we're swimming in. Those are the things that we have to ask ourselves and not worry about, like Jeremy said, pointing fingers at others. I will say the way that keeping Jesus at the center helps is something we've said here today. We've said before, Jeremy said it in his sermon, is when you've got Jesus at the center, that's the lens by which you're reading these things. And when you're reading through Jesus' at the center, you think, what was the ultimate revelation? That was Jesus on the cross, sacrificing himself because of love for us, for others. That's the picture that we need to keep in mind. And so anytime, if we're reading a text, if we're reading scripture and it causes us to point fingers at someone and try to label them, you're that, then we're off kilter. I don't think that's the point. So we need to be looking through the lens of self-sacrificial love for others. Does that mean that we don't call out when we've gotten off track? Absolutely not. But again, like you said, Dan, those are things that are done in relationship, in my experience and what things I've seen and things I've heard. When we're labeling folks these like awful names with awful intentions, it's usually not within relationship. It's really just more of a, pointing a finger at a distance. So
yeah,
that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think that's dead on. Good word.
All right. Well, I think we've done all of this, and I think we need to he's getting stretched and ready to go.
Yeah, I'm stretching,
Dan.
Yeah.
He's ready to go. He's been doing his yoga, and it is time for nugget time. Woo. All right, Dan, give us your nugget.
Oh, okay. So I think I've been thinking, pondering this personal application stuff, and especially with a text, an apocalyptic text that uses so much imagery. How do you pull a practical application from that? I mean, it could go all over the place. And so I guess the answer, though, I think is right here in the text. And at each church, Jesus gives them the compliment sandwich. He gives them this is what you're doing good, but I have this against you. And then he offers them the promise of the reward. And in each of those, he says, to those who have an ear, to those who are tuned in, listen to what the Spirit says. And I think that is sort of, Jesus is giving this message to the entire church, but not everybody there is tuned in. And so that's our responsibility, to be tuned in. And I think part of what that means is that we need to be listening to what God is saying intentionally for ourselves. Like, what do I need to hear out of this? And it's great if Shawna or Jeremy or Greg or myself are able to offer a personal application that helps people and helps you and me and whatever. But you can't rely on that. I mean, Jesus is still giving each of us the responsibility to take ownership of our ears, to take ownership of how we attend to what God is saying. And so I think that's sort of this echoing call throughout each of these churches is take responsibility for how you're attending to these things. Part of that is being self-aware, knowing what you're struggling with and what you want out of your walk with God and what you're called to and all of those types of things, and listening through that lens so that you can hear what God is saying to you in particular. And I guess that would be my nugget.
I like it, Dan. My nugget is pretty short and sweet, and it's that, as we are continually coming to this text in Revelation and we are reading these things, my prayer and hope is that we will see the hopefulness that is there, that we will see the victory in Jesus that is there, and that will be our focus. And are there things that we need to learn from these texts? Yes, absolutely. But my hope is that we don't look at these texts and then automatically think of, well, oof, at least that's not my problem, or I don't have that going on. Or like Jeremy said, anytime that we elevate ourselves or we try to separate ourselves, then that's not the kingdom at work. And so let's approach this text. Let's see the hopefulness that is offered, because we do know that Jesus does come victorious, and what he slays are not people. He slays the lies. He slays the deception. And so if that's going to be what happens in the end, I want to be about the business of trying to do some of that now, like slaying the lies, slaying this deception. I want to be awakened to the places in which I have bought into lies, or I am living in deception. And again, I need people around me to help me see that. And so that's the heart posture and the mindset I always want us to approach these scriptures with. I think that's really important. Instead of getting sidetracked by, as some have called it, John's acid trip. But no, like there's a lot of imagery there. There's a lot of things that seem very harsh and very shocking. Okay, so what are we going to do with that? What are we going to learn from that? And that's something you've got to dig into for yourself, because it's going to look different for each of us. But ultimately, the bottom line for me is slaying those lies, not living in that deception. You know, being as much of a reflection of Jesus as I can be. And then in those places where I fall short, repenting of that, and then hopefully making changes in my life. And so ultimately, I'm choosing to lean into the hope that Jesus offers. I love the open door. I just like to think of that, like there is an open door. We have a choice to respond to that or not. And my hope is that we all would walk through that open door. I don't know how long this episode was today, but we went through some stuff, and just, you know, I'm just going to say it's Jeremy. Like, I think he drew it out of us, you know, just the more contemplative, thinking through, processing, reflecting, all of it. I think it's an ode to what a great job he did. Mm-hmm. So with that, we say thank you for tuning in. We look forward to chatting with you 4 p.m. on YouTube. We will have Jeremy's book that Dan showed you in the link, as long. And Jeremy also referenced some other books in his sermon. Go back and listen and get those, because those were some good resources. Now my words aren't working anymore, so it's time to go, Dan.
I'm off.
It's time to go.
Right. Yeah, Jesus says, "Those who have an ear, listen." I need a mouth. That's what I need. I can't. So anyway.
Yeah. What the heck? Oh man. With that, we say good day and have a great week.
Yeah. See you guys.